Standing out has never been easy, yet every remarkable life in history began the same way. Someone refused to follow the pattern. While the crowd walked one path, a few individuals chose another. While others accepted the rules handed to them, they questioned them. And while the majority settled for the familiar, they pursued something different. This simple decision to think differently, to act differently, and to live differently has always separated those who rise above the crowd from those who quietly blend into it. Human societies are built on patterns. Schools teach similar ideas, workplaces reward predictable behavior, and culture often encourages people to stay within the boundaries of what is considered normal. Following these patterns feels safe. It offers approval, comfort, and a sense of belonging. Yet the same patterns that create comfort can also quietly limit potential. They shape ambitions, restrict imagination, and slowly convince people that the life they see around them is the only life possible. A different life begins with a different mindset. The moment a person dares to question the path everyone else is walking, new possibilities begin to appear. What once seemed fixed starts to look flexible. What once felt impossible begins to look achievable. The world suddenly becomes larger than the narrow expectations of the crowd. In this audiobook, we will explore how to recognize the invisible patterns that shape everyday life, how to challenge the beliefs that keep people ordinary, and how to develop the courage to walk a path that truly belongs to you. You will discover how independent thinking, disciplined habits, and personal courage can help you rise above conformity and create a life defined not by imitation, but by intention. The purpose is not to be different simply for attention. The purpose is to live honestly, think freely, and build a life that reflects your true potential. Let's begin. Chapter 1. See the pattern most people never notice. A life rarely becomes extraordinary by accident. It changes when a person begins to see something others overlook, the quiet pattern shaping the lives around them. Once you notice that pattern, you cannot unsee it. It begins to appear everywhere, in the choices people make, in the paths they follow, and in the limits they place on themselves without even realizing it. Look closely at how most lives unfold. A child grows up hearing certain ideas repeated again and again. Study hard, get good grades, choose a safe career, follow the steps that everyone else follows. None of these ideas are necessarily wrong. Education is valuable, discipline matters, and stability can be wise. But something subtle happens when these instructions are repeated without question. They begin to form a pattern, a predictable path that millions of people follow without ever asking whether it truly belongs to them. The pattern becomes stronger with time. Schools often reward the ability to follow instructions more than the courage to think differently. Workplaces frequently encourage people to stay within defined roles rather than challenge them. Even social circles can quietly pressure individuals to behave in familiar ways. When everyone around you is walking the same direction, turning another way can feel uncomfortable. And so the pattern continues, generation after generation. You may have seen this in your own life. Think about how many people choose a career not because it excites them, but because it seems safe or respectable. Think about how many dreams are quietly abandoned because they do not fit the expectations of family or society. It happens slowly, almost invisibly. No one announces, "Today I will give up my potential." Instead, small decisions accumulate. A safer choice here, a smaller ambition there, until eventually the path becomes fixed. History offers many reminders of what happens when someone finally sees the pattern and refuses to accept it. Consider the early days of personal computing. For years, computers were large, complex machines used mainly by corporations and research institutions. The pattern suggested that technology belonged to specialists, yet a few young innovators believed something different. They imagined computers that ordinary people could use in their homes. That idea sounded unrealistic to many at the time, but the willingness to challenge the pattern eventually helped transform how the entire world works, communicates, and learns. The same principle appears in everyday life as well. Imagine a young professional named Daniel working in a stable office job. Every day looks nearly identical. He arrives in the morning, completes his tasks, returns home, and repeats the routine. Many people around him accept this rhythm as permanent. But Daniel begins to notice something. He realizes that everyone in the office seems to be following the same unspoken script: arrive, work, wait for promotions, retire decades later. No one questions whether another path might exist. The moment Daniel notices this pattern, a quiet thought enters his mind. What if life does not have to look exactly like this? That question is powerful, not because it immediately changes everything, but because it opens a door that was previously invisible. Once a person begins asking questions like this, awareness grows. You start noticing how often people act out of habit instead of intention. You see how many decisions are driven by fear of standing out rather than desire to grow. Seeing the pattern does not mean rejecting everything around you. It simply means becoming conscious. Conscious of the expectations that influence you, conscious of the invisible rules guiding your decisions, conscious of the fact that what appears normal is often just repeated behavior. And here is the important part. The moment you see the pattern, you gain a new kind of freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, but freedom from unconscious imitation. You begin to realize that many of the limits people accept are not permanent walls. They are habits of thinking, passed from one generation to the next. When awareness grows, possibilities grow with it. Paths that once seemed closed begin to look open. Dreams that once seemed unrealistic begin to look worth exploring. The crowd may continue walking the same road it always has, but you begin to understand that another direction is possible. Every meaningful change begins this way, with awareness, with the quiet realization that the life everyone else accepts is not the only life available. Once you see the pattern most people never notice, you stand at the beginning of a very different journey, the journey of choosing your own path instead of inheriting someone else's. Chapter 2. Question the rules you were told to follow. Every life is shaped by rules. Some are written clearly in laws and policies, but many of the most powerful rules are never written down. They are simply passed along from person to person, from generation to generation, until they begin to feel permanent. These rules quietly guide how people think, what they believe is possible, and how far they allow themselves to go. You have probably heard many of these rules throughout your life. Choose the safest path. Do not take too many risks. Stay within your limits. Follow the steps that others have already followed. At first, these ideas may sound wise. After all, caution can protect us from mistakes. Experience can teach valuable lessons. But something important must be understood. Not every rule that people follow was designed to help you grow. Many rules were created simply to maintain order. Others were created because someone, somewhere, once believed that was the best way to do things. Over time, these ideas hardened into assumptions. And once an assumption becomes widely accepted, people stop questioning it. They simply obey it. Think about the early days of human flight. For centuries, the belief that humans could not fly was treated almost like a law of nature. People assumed the sky belonged only to birds. The idea of a machine carrying human beings through the air sounded unrealistic, even foolish. Yet two bicycle mechanics, Wilbur and Orville Wright, refused to accept that rule without questioning it. They studied the problem, experimented with designs, failed many times, and continued anyway. Because they challenged a belief that others accepted as permanent, the world eventually witnessed the first successful powered flight. Now consider how often similar invisible rules shape everyday decisions. A young artist may be told that creative work is unstable, so they abandon their passion in favor of something safer. An entrepreneur may be warned that starting a business is too risky, so the idea remains only a dream. Someone with a bold idea might silence themselves simply because they were taught not to challenge authority. Over time, these quiet rules become mental fences. They are not real walls, yet they limit movement just the same. People stay inside them because they assume those fences cannot be crossed. The truth is that progress often begins when someone asks a simple question: why? Why must things be done this way? Why is this path considered the only option? Why should a belief that was formed decades ago still control decisions today? That question, why, has the power to unlock new thinking. It does not mean rejecting everything that came before. Some rules are valuable. Some principles have survived because they truly work. But wisdom lies in examining them, not blindly accepting them. Imagine a young professional named Sarah who works in a company where everyone follows the same routine. Meetings are conducted the same way they have been for years. Ideas are rarely challenged. Innovation is limited because the team assumes the existing process cannot be improved. One day, Sarah begins asking thoughtful questions. She wonders whether a new method might save time, whether technology might simplify certain tasks, whether the company could approach problems differently. At first, people resist her suggestions. "This is how we have always done it," they say. Yet gradually, her questions reveal opportunities for improvement that others had overlooked. This is how change begins, not with rebellion, but with curiosity. Questioning rules requires courage because it often creates discomfort. When you challenge an assumption, you disrupt familiarity. People may react defensively. They may interpret your questions as criticism of tradition or authority. But questioning a rule does not mean disrespecting those who came before you. It simply means recognizing that progress requires continuous re-examination. The world we live in today exists because countless individuals refuse to accept certain limits. Scientists questioned old theories about the universe. Inventors challenged the belief that new technologies were impossible. Leaders questioned social structures that once seemed unchangeable. Each step forward began with someone willing to examine the rules others followed without thought. Your own life is no different. Somewhere in your thinking, there are likely rules you have accepted without examination. Perhaps you believe you are not capable of a certain achievement. Perhaps you assume that opportunities are limited to certain types of people. Perhaps you feel that the path you started years ago cannot be changed, but many of those beliefs are simply inherited assumptions. The moment you begin to question them, something powerful happens. Your thinking expands. Possibilities begin to appear where you once saw limitations. You start to realize that some of the boundaries you respected were never permanent at all. Daring to be different begins with this willingness to examine the rules guiding your life. Not to reject them blindly, but to test them, to ask whether they serve your growth or quietly restrict it, because the path beyond the crowd does not open for those who obey every rule without question. It opens for those who are curious enough and courageous enough to ask whether the rule should exist in the first place. Chapter 3. Stop living for the approval of others. Approval is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. It is quiet, subtle, and often invisible, yet it influences countless decisions every single day. People change their opinions to avoid criticism. They adjust their dreams to fit expectations. They hide parts of their personality because they fear standing out too much. Slowly, without realizing it, they begin to live a life designed not by their own values, but by the reactions of others. The desire for approval begins early in life. As children, we naturally look for encouragement from parents, teachers, and friends. Praise makes us feel accepted. Criticism can feel uncomfortable. Over time, the mind learns a simple pattern. Approval feels safe. Disapproval feels dangerous. That lesson stays with many people long into adulthood. But here is the problem. When approval becomes the main compass guiding your choices, your life gradually stops belonging to you. Instead of asking, "What do I truly want?" the question quietly becomes, "What will others think?" And when that happens, potential begins to shrink. Consider how often people hesitate to speak honestly because they worry about how others will react. A new idea remains unspoken in a meeting because someone fears it might sound foolish. A creative ambition is hidden because friends might not understand it. Even personal goals are sometimes adjusted to fit what society considers acceptable. This is how the crowd maintains its influence. Not through force, but through social pressure. People learn that approval is rewarded, while standing apart can invite criticism. And so, little by little, many choose the safer path of blending in. History offers powerful reminders of what happens when someone stops living for approval. Think about the early innovators in technology and science who pursued ideas that others initially dismissed. When new concepts challenge established thinking, they often attract skepticism or ridicule before they gain acceptance. If every pioneer waited for approval before acting, many of the advancements we rely on today would never have happened. Yet this lesson is not limited to famous figures. It appears in ordinary lives as well. Imagine a young woman named Lena who has always loved writing. Since childhood, she has filled notebooks with stories and ideas. But as she grows older, people around her begin suggesting more practical choices. Writing, they say, is uncertain. It is difficult. It may not provide stability. Gradually, Lena begins to doubt herself. She wonders whether pursuing her passion would make her appear unrealistic. One day she realizes something important. The opinions surrounding her are not necessarily wrong, but they are shaped by other people's fears and experiences. Those voices are not living her life, they are simply observing it from the outside. Once Lena understands this, she begins writing again, not because everyone approves, but because the desire to create matters more than the desire to impress. This shift in thinking is powerful. Living for approval keeps a person confined within the expectations of others. Living with conviction allows a person to explore possibilities that the crowd may never understand. Of course, letting go of approval does not mean ignoring wisdom or constructive advice. Listening to thoughtful feedback can be valuable. The difference lies in who holds the final authority. When you seek guidance, you remain the decision maker. When you chase approval, the crowd quietly becomes the decision maker instead. There is also an important truth that many people eventually discover: approval is unpredictable. The same action that earns praise from one group may attract criticism from another. Trying to satisfy everyone becomes an endless task. The more a person adjusts themselves to please others, the more they lose a clear sense of who they are. Freedom begins when you accept a simple reality. Not everyone will understand your path. Not everyone will support your decisions, and that is perfectly normal. People view the world through their own experiences, fears, and expectations. Their opinions are reflections of their perspective, not definitions of your potential. When you stop chasing approval, something remarkable happens. Your thinking becomes clearer. Your actions become more intentional. Instead of constantly measuring yourself against the reactions of others, you begin measuring your life against your own values and aspirations. This does not mean the journey becomes easier. Standing apart from the crowd often invites questions, doubts, and occasional criticism, but it also brings something far more valuable than approval: authenticity. A life built on authenticity carries a quiet strength. Decisions come from purpose rather than pressure. Effort is guided by meaning rather than popularity, and progress becomes possible in directions that once seemed too risky to explore. Daring to be different requires this kind of independence. The crowd will always have expectations, opinions will always exist, but the moment you stop living for approval is the moment you reclaim ownership of your path, and when that happens, you are no longer walking the road designed by others. You are finally beginning to walk your own. Chapter 4. Wake up from the comfort of the crowd. Comfort can be one of the most deceptive forces in life. It feels pleasant, it feels safe, it feels predictable. Yet the very thing that provides comfort can quietly become the reason people remain stuck where they are. The crowd lives in comfort, and because comfort feels good, very few people ever question it. Look closely at the routines that surround everyday life. Many people wake up at the same time every morning, travel the same roads, complete the same tasks, and repeat the same conversations. Days turn into weeks. Weeks turn into years, and before long a decade has passed. Nothing dramatic happened, nothing terrible necessarily occurred, but nothing truly remarkable happened either. Life simply followed a familiar rhythm. The crowd often accepts this rhythm without hesitation. After all, routine brings stability, stability brings comfort, and comfort brings a sense of security. But there is a quiet danger hidden inside that security. When comfort becomes the main goal, growth quietly disappears. Think about how the mind reacts when faced with something unfamiliar. A new opportunity appears, but it requires risk. A new idea forms, but it challenges existing habits. Immediately the mind begins offering reasons to stay where it is. This is too uncertain, maybe later. Things are already fine the way they are. These thoughts sound reasonable, but they are often the voice of comfort protecting its territory. Imagine a man named Karim who has worked at the same company for 15 years. The job is stable, the salary arrives on time, and the routine is familiar. Yet deep inside, Karim feels a quiet dissatisfaction. Years ago, he dreamed about building his own small business. The idea excited him, but the longer he stayed in his routine, the harder it became to imagine stepping outside of it. One evening, Karim notices something interesting while talking with an old friend. His friend had once been in a similar situation, working a comfortable job but feeling limited by it. Eventually, that friend decided to take a risk. He started small, experimenting with a side project in the evenings. At first, it was uncertain. There were doubts, mistakes, and moments of frustration. But gradually, the project grew. Over time, it became something meaningful. Karim realizes that the difference between them was not intelligence or talent. The difference was simply the willingness to step outside comfort. The crowd prefers comfort because comfort protects people from failure, criticism, and uncertainty. But comfort also protects people from progress. It shields them from the experiences that build resilience, creativity, and courage. Consider how progress has always required someone to leave the comfort of familiar thinking. Explorers crossed oceans that others feared. Inventors experimented with ideas that seemed impossible. Leaders spoke truths that others avoided. Each step forward in human history happened because someone refused to remain where things felt safe. Yet waking up from the comfort of the crowd does not require dramatic gestures. It begins with awareness. Awareness that comfort can slowly become a cage. Awareness that routine can quietly replace ambition. Awareness that safety, while valuable, can sometimes hide opportunity. Small changes often mark the beginning of this awakening. Someone decides to learn a new skill instead of spending another evening repeating the same habits. Someone speaks up with an idea instead of remaining silent. Someone explores a possibility that once felt intimidating. These moments may appear small, but they signal something powerful. A person is beginning to move beyond the boundaries of the crowd. The mind often resists this change at first. It prefers what it already knows. But with each step outside comfort, confidence grows. The unfamiliar becomes familiar. What once felt risky begins to feel natural. Think about the athletes who push their limits in training. Improvement rarely happens while remaining comfortable. Muscles grow stronger through effort and resistance. The same principle applies to personal growth. Strength of character develops when people challenge themselves rather than protecting themselves from every difficulty. The crowd will always encourage comfort because comfort keeps everything predictable. When everyone stays inside familiar routines, the system remains unchanged. But the individuals who rise above the crowd understand something different. They recognize that real progress begins where comfort ends. This realization does not mean rejecting stability or security entirely. It means refusing to let comfort become the only guiding principle of life. Stability can support growth, but it should never replace it. Waking up from the comfort of the crowd is a moment of clarity, a moment when you realize that life can offer more than repetition, more than routine, more than quiet acceptance of what has always been. And once that realization appears, a new question begins to take shape. If the path of comfort leads only to the ordinary, what might happen if you choose the path of growth instead? That question is where transformation begins. Chapter 5. Think independently when everyone else follows. Independent thinking is one of the rarest abilities in the world, not because people lack intelligence, but because the habit of following others is deeply ingrained. From an early age, individuals are taught how to behave, what to believe, and how things are supposed to work. Over time, these ideas become so familiar that many people stop examining them altogether. They simply accept them. Following the crowd often feels natural. When everyone around you believes something, it can appear obvious that the belief must be correct. When everyone chooses a certain path, it feels safer to choose the same one. The human mind is designed to seek belonging, and belonging often encourages agreement. But independent thinking requires something different. It requires the willingness to pause and ask a simple question: is this truly the right path, or is it simply the popular one? Throughout history, progress has depended on individuals who were willing to think differently from the majority. When a new idea appears, it often challenges existing beliefs. The first reaction from the crowd is usually doubt. Sometimes that doubt is expressed through criticism, sometimes through laughter, and sometimes through quiet dismissal. Consider the story of a young student named Ethan who was fascinated by engineering. While many of his classmates focused only on passing exams, Ethan spent time asking questions about how machines could be improved. He often approached problems in ways that others had not considered. Some teachers appreciated his curiosity, but others found his questions inconvenient because they disrupted the normal pattern of learning. One day, during a class project, Ethan proposed a design that was very different from what the group had been doing. His teammates initially rejected the idea. It seemed unusual, and they preferred the familiar approach. But Ethan calmly explained his reasoning and showed how the new design could solve a problem more efficiently. After some hesitation, the group agreed to test his idea. The results surprised everyone. His unconventional thinking produced a solution that worked better than the original plan. What made the difference was not superior intelligence. It was simply the courage to think independently. The challenge with independent thinking is that it often feels uncomfortable at first. When you question common assumptions, you may feel uncertain. When you express ideas that differ from the majority, you may worry about being misunderstood. The mind naturally prefers harmony with the group. Yet the ability to think for yourself is one of the greatest sources of personal freedom. It allows you to evaluate information rather than blindly accepting it. It helps you see opportunities that others overlook. It encourages creativity, problem-solving, and innovation. Independent thinking also protects you from one of the most powerful forces in society, collective assumption. Collective assumptions occur when large groups of people believe something simply because everyone else believes it. These assumptions can influence markets, politics, education, and even personal lifestyles. For example, there have been many moments in history when widely accepted ideas were later proven incomplete or incorrect. Scientific breakthroughs often occur when someone examines a belief that others have accepted for years and begins asking deeper questions. But independent thinking does not mean rejecting every idea around you. True independence involves thoughtful evaluation. It means listening carefully, observing closely, and then forming your own conclusion based on understanding rather than imitation. Imagine walking through a crowded marketplace. Hundreds of voices speak at once, each offering opinions, advice, and directions. If you follow every voice, you will quickly become confused. But if you pause, observe, and choose carefully which guidance deserves attention, you begin to move with clarity. The same principle applies to thinking. Information surrounds us constantly through conversations, news, social media, and cultural expectations. Independent thinkers learn how to filter this information. They examine it, question it, and decide which ideas deserve acceptance. This skill becomes increasingly valuable in a world where opinions spread quickly and confidently. Not every popular idea is wise. Not every widely accepted belief leads to progress. Sometimes the most important insights come from individuals who quietly step back and examine what everyone else takes for granted. Developing independent thought also requires patience. The mind must become comfortable with uncertainty. Instead of rushing to adopt the majority opinion, you allow time for reflection. You gather knowledge. You consider different perspectives. Gradually, your understanding deepens. Over time, this habit strengthens confidence. When your conclusions come from careful thinking rather than imitation, you trust them more deeply. Decisions become clearer because they are rooted in your own reasoning. Daring to be different begins with this ability to think independently. The crowd will always follow familiar patterns, repeating ideas that feel comfortable. But those who rise above the crowd cultivate the habit of thoughtful examination. They listen, they observe, and they reflect. Then, when the moment comes, they choose their path, not because it is popular, but because it is true to their understanding. And in a world full of followers, the quiet power of independent thinking becomes one of the greatest advantages a person can possess. Chapter 6. Turn your differences into your strength. Difference has a strange reputation in the world. When people are young, they often want to blend in. They do not want to appear strange, unusual, or different from everyone else. The pressure to fit in can be surprisingly strong. It appears in classrooms, workplaces, social groups, and even families. From an early age, many individuals quietly learn that being normal is safer than being unique. But the truth is something very different. The qualities that make a person stand out are often the same qualities that make them valuable. Think about it for a moment. If everyone in the world thought exactly the same way, acted the same way, and solved problems the same way, progress would slow to a crawl. Innovation happens because someone sees a problem differently. Creativity appears because someone thinks differently. Leadership emerges because someone behaves differently. Yet many people spend years trying to hide the very traits that could make them exceptional. Perhaps you have experienced this yourself. Maybe there was a time when you had a unique idea, but you kept it to yourself because it seemed too different. Maybe you had a particular talent, but you downplayed it because others around you did not share the same interest. Slowly, without noticing it, you might have learned to smooth out the edges of your personality so that you could fit more comfortably within the crowd. This happens everywhere. A creative student learns to stop asking unusual questions because classmates might laugh. An imaginative employee stops suggesting bold ideas because the workplace prefers predictable solutions. Over time, difference begins to feel like a weakness rather than a strength, but history tells a very different story. Many of the individuals who changed the world were once considered unusual. Their ideas seemed strange, their interests appeared unconventional. In some cases, they were even criticized for thinking differently from everyone else, yet the very thing that made them stand out eventually became the reason they succeeded. Consider the world of art and creativity. Artists who introduce new styles are rarely accepted immediately. When a new form of expression appears, the public often reacts with confusion. This is too different, people say. But years later, that same style may become admired and influential. The same pattern appears in business, science, and technology. New solutions often look unusual at first because they challenge existing habits, but those unusual ideas are frequently the ones that move society forward. Imagine a young designer named Arman, who works in a company where most employees follow traditional methods. Arman sees things differently. While others focus only on small improvements, he imagines entirely new approaches to solving problems. At first, some colleagues view his ideas as unrealistic. They prefer familiar methods because they feel safer. But Arman continues refining his ideas. He studies, experiments, and patiently improves his concepts. Eventually, one of his designs begins to show real potential. What once looked unusual suddenly reveals its value. The difference that others questioned becomes the advantage that sets him apart. This example reflects an important principle. Being different is not automatically valuable. The real power comes when difference is combined with effort, discipline, and purpose. A unique perspective becomes meaningful when it is developed and applied. Think of difference as raw material. It is the starting point, not the final result. Just as a sculptor shapes stone into a statue, individuals must shape their unique traits into strengths. Some people possess natural curiosity. Instead of suppressing it, they use it to explore new knowledge. Others have strong empathy, which allows them to understand people deeply. Some have unusual problem-solving abilities, seeing patterns that others overlook. Each of these differences can become powerful when cultivated. The challenge is that embracing difference often requires courage. When you express a perspective that others do not share, you may face confusion or resistance. People sometimes react cautiously toward what they do not immediately understand, yet this is precisely why difference matters. The crowd tends to repeat what already exists. Progress depends on individuals willing to step beyond those repetitions. Another important truth must also be remembered. Difference does not mean isolation. Being unique does not require rejecting cooperation or community. Instead, it means contributing something distinct within those relationships. When individuals bring their unique strengths into a shared effort, the entire group becomes stronger. Imagine a team where every member thinks exactly the same way. Creativity would be limited, solutions would be narrow, but when different perspectives come together, ideas expand. Problems are examined from multiple angles, innovation becomes possible. Your differences, your interests, your experiences, your perspectives are not obstacles to success. They are potential sources of strength. They give you a viewpoint that no one else possesses in exactly the same way. The key is learning to recognize those differences and develop them intentionally, instead of asking, how can I become more like everyone else? A more powerful question is, how can I become the best version of what makes me unique? Daring to be different begins with this shift in perspective. What once seemed like a reason to hide can become a reason to grow. What once felt like a weakness can become a strength that sets you apart. Because in a world where millions of people try to blend into the crowd, the individuals who learn to cultivate their uniqueness are the ones who truly rise above it. Chapter 7. Develop the courage to stand alone. Walking with the crowd is easy. When many people move in the same direction, the path feels safe and familiar. Decisions become simpler because they have already been made by others. The majority provides reassurance. If everyone is doing the same thing, it must be the right thing, or at least that is what the mind often assumes. But the moment you begin choosing a different path, something changes. The safety of the crowd disappears. Suddenly you are responsible for your own direction. Your decisions are no longer supported by the comfort of numbers, and that is where courage becomes necessary. Standing alone does not always mean complete isolation. It means having the strength to move forward even when others hesitate, doubt, or disagree. It means trusting your judgment when the crowd cannot yet see what you see. Many people hesitate at this stage. They may have ideas, ambitions, or beliefs that differ from those around them. Yet when they imagine the possibility of standing alone, they retreat back into the comfort of conformity. The fear of being misunderstood becomes stronger than the desire to pursue something meaningful. But nearly every meaningful achievement in history required someone to endure moments of standing alone. Consider the early scientists who challenged widely accepted beliefs about the universe. For centuries, people held firm ideas about how the world worked. When new observations began to contradict those beliefs, the individuals presenting them often faced skepticism and resistance. Their ideas seemed strange because they disrupted long-held assumptions. Yet those individuals continued their work. They studied, tested, and refined their understanding, even when acceptance was slow. Eventually, their courage reshaped humanity's understanding of the world. Standing alone does not require dramatic acts of rebellion. In most cases, it appears in quieter forms. It might be the employee who proposes a new solution when everyone else insists the current system cannot change. It might be the student who pursues a field of study that others consider unusual. It might be the entrepreneur who starts building something new while friends question whether it will succeed. Imagine a young man named David who decides to pursue a career that few people around him understand. While many of his peers choose predictable professions, David becomes fascinated with environmental technology. At first, the field seems uncertain. Some people advise him to choose something safer. Others simply do not see the value in his interest. There are moments when David questions himself. Doubt appears, especially when he notices how easily others fit into conventional paths. But he continues studying, experimenting, and learning. Years later, as environmental innovation becomes increasingly important, David finds himself working in an area that is suddenly gaining global attention. What once looked uncertain has become valuable. The key difference was not luck, it was persistence during the period when standing alone felt uncomfortable. Courage grows gradually. It is not something people suddenly discover within themselves. Instead, it develops through repeated experiences of choosing principle over pressure. The first time you stand by your own thinking, it may feel intimidating. The mind may search for reassurance. You may wonder whether the crowd knows something you do not. But with each decision that aligns with your values and understanding, confidence strengthens. Another important truth should also be remembered. Standing alone does not mean you are always correct. No one possesses perfect judgment. But the ability to think independently and act with integrity is far more valuable than simply following the majority. Sometimes the crowd eventually recognizes the value of what once seemed unusual. Other times your path may remain unique. Both outcomes are acceptable. What matters is that your choices reflect intention rather than imitation. The courage to stand alone also creates a powerful inner stability. When your decisions come from conviction rather than social pressure, external opinions lose much of their influence. Praise becomes less intoxicating and criticism becomes less intimidating. You remain focused on your purpose rather than constantly adjusting to the reactions of others. This kind of stability is rare, yet it forms the foundation of true leadership. Leaders are not defined simply by titles or authority. They are defined by their willingness to move forward even when certainty is incomplete and approval is absent. Think about how many opportunities are lost because individuals wait for permission that never arrives. They wait for universal agreement, perfect conditions, or guaranteed success. But progress rarely begins under those circumstances. It begins when someone decides that the vision in their mind matters more than the comfort of agreement. Developing the courage to stand alone does not separate you from humanity. In fact, it allows you to contribute something meaningful to it. When individuals act with independent conviction, they expand what others believe is possible. The crowd may hesitate, the crowd may question, But every path that eventually leads to progress begins with a single person willing to take the first step without knowing who will follow. And that step, quiet, uncertain, yet determined, is the moment courage truly begins. Chapter 8. Build a mind that resists pressure. Pressure is one of the most powerful forces shaping human behavior. It rarely appears as a command. No one usually stands in front of you and orders you to think or act a certain way. Instead, pressure works quietly through expectations, opinions, and the subtle signals of what society considers normal. People feel this pressure every day. Friends influence decisions, family expectations guide choices, cultural norms shape beliefs about what success should look like and how life should be lived. Without noticing it, individuals begin adjusting themselves to match what others expect. This is how conformity spreads. It does not require force, it simply requires repetition. When the same ideas are repeated long enough, they begin to feel like truth. When the same behaviors are practiced by the majority, they begin to appear like the only reasonable option. Over time, many people lose the habit of questioning these influences. But if you want to rise above the crowd, you must develop a mind that can resist this pressure. Resisting pressure does not mean becoming stubborn or rejecting every opinion around you. It means learning to recognize when outside influence is shaping your decisions in ways that limit your growth. Imagine a young university student named Imran who is passionate about studying robotics and artificial intelligence. While his interest excites him, many of his classmates prefer more familiar career paths. Some suggest that his field is too competitive. Others warn that the technology industry changes too quickly. At first, these comments begin affecting Imran's confidence. He wonders whether he should choose something safer. The constant repetition of doubt slowly creates pressure to abandon his interest, but Imran eventually realizes something important. Most of the people giving advice are not experts in the field he wants to pursue. Their opinions are shaped by uncertainty rather than knowledge. Once he understands this, the pressure loses much of its influence. Instead of abandoning his interest, he continues learning, building projects, and improving his skills. Years later, his dedication leads him to opportunities that those early critics could never have imagined. This example shows how pressure often operates through fear. When people encounter unfamiliar paths, they naturally imagine potential risks. Their concern may come from good intentions, but it can still discourage progress. Building a mind that resists pressure requires developing inner clarity. You must know what matters to you and why it matters. When your values and goals are clear, outside opinions become easier to evaluate. Without that clarity, the mind easily becomes confused. Every voice sounds persuasive, every opinion seems important. Decisions begin shifting based on whichever influence is strongest in the moment. Clarity acts like an anchor. Another important skill is emotional discipline. Social pressure often triggers emotional reactions, fear of rejection, discomfort from criticism, or anxiety about standing apart from the group. These feelings are natural, but they do not have to control your decisions. When you learn to pause and reflect rather than react immediately, you create space between influence and action. That space allows you to evaluate whether a suggestion truly deserves your attention. There is also a psychological advantage to building resilience against pressure. When you become comfortable standing by your values, external approval becomes less necessary. Your confidence grows from internal conviction rather than constant validation from others. This independence allows you to pursue ideas that others might hesitate to explore. It encourages creativity and innovation because your thinking is not limited by the need to conform. However, developing this mindset requires practice. Pressure will not disappear from your life. Society will always present expectations about how people should behave, what they should pursue, and what they should avoid. But the goal is not to eliminate pressure. The goal is to prevent it from controlling your path. One helpful approach is learning to observe pressure rather than immediately responding to it. When someone expresses doubt about your plans, notice the reaction within your mind. Ask yourself whether the comment contains useful information or simply reflects someone else's perspective. Another powerful habit is surrounding yourself with individuals who respect independent thinking. When your environment supports curiosity and growth, resisting negative pressure becomes much easier. Gradually, these practices strengthen your mental independence. Instead of being pushed in different directions by every opinion you hear, you begin navigating with your own internal compass, and that compass becomes essential when you dare to be different. Because the moment you step outside the crowd, the pressure to return will appear. People may question your choices, some may doubt your direction, others may simply feel uncomfortable with anything unfamiliar. But a mind trained to resist pressure understands something important. The crowd often reacts to difference, not because it is wrong, but because it is unfamiliar, and when you learn to remain steady in the presence of that pressure, you gain something incredibly valuable, the freedom to continue moving forward, even when others hesitate. Chapter 9. Create habits that separate you from the crowd. Success rarely appears suddenly. It does not arrive in a single dramatic moment, nor does it emerge from one brilliant decision. Instead, success grows quietly through daily habits. Small actions repeated over time gradually shape the direction of a life. And this is where a powerful truth becomes clear: the habits of the crowd produce the results of the crowd. Look around at how most people structure their days. Many routines are built around convenience rather than growth. Hours disappear into distractions, comfort, and activities that require little effort. Days pass quickly, but progress remains slow. Nothing feels obviously wrong, yet nothing remarkable is happening either. Habits explain this pattern. Every action we repeat trains the mind and body to expect the same behavior tomorrow. Over time, habits form invisible tracks that guide our lives in predictable directions. If those tracks lead toward comfort and distraction, life gradually moves toward mediocrity. But if those tracks lead toward discipline and growth, life begins moving toward excellence. The difference between these two paths is rarely dramatic in the beginning. It appears in small choices. One person spends 30 minutes each day learning something new, while another spends that same time scrolling through endless distractions. One person wakes early to focus on personal development, while another repeatedly delays important work. These decisions may look insignificant on a single day, but over months and years they produce dramatically different outcomes. Imagine two friends, Amir and Rahim, who graduate from school at the same time and begin similar careers. At the beginning, their situations look almost identical. They earn similar salaries and share similar opportunities, but Amir adopts a simple habit. Every evening he spends 1 hour learning skills related to his field. Sometimes he reads books, sometimes he watches lectures, and sometimes he practices new techniques. Rahim, on the other hand, prefers to relax after work. He watches entertainment, scrolls through social media, and tells himself he will focus on improvement later. Neither decision seems dramatic at first. Both men feel comfortable with their routines. 5 years pass. Amir's consistent learning has gradually expanded his abilities. His knowledge deepens, his confidence grows, and new opportunities begin appearing. Rahim, however, remains in nearly the same position where he started. His routine never changed, and therefore his progress remained limited. This example illustrates a simple but powerful principle. Habits compound. Just as small investments grow through interest over time, daily actions accumulate into long-term results. The crowd often ignores this truth because habits appear too small to matter in the moment, but those small actions quietly build the future. Developing habits that separate you from the crowd requires intention. The mind naturally prefers comfort and familiarity, so meaningful habits rarely form without conscious effort. Discipline becomes the bridge between intention and action. Consider the routines of individuals who consistently achieve exceptional results. Many of them structure their days carefully. They dedicate time to learning, thinking, planning, and improving. They understand that success is not an accident, it is the outcome of repeated preparation. These habits do not need to be extreme or exhausting. In fact, the most powerful habits are often simple and sustainable. Reading a few pages each day, exercising regularly, reflecting on goals, practicing a skill consistently. These actions may seem modest, but their influence grows with time. The key is consistency. Extraordinary change rarely occurs through occasional bursts of effort. It appears through steady, disciplined repetition. One day of focused work may not transform your life, but thousands of such days gradually reshape your abilities and opportunities. Another important aspect of powerful habits is environment. Our surroundings often influence our behavior more than we realize. If you are constantly surrounded by distractions, maintaining productive habits becomes difficult. But when your environment supports focus and discipline, good habits become easier to sustain. For example, someone who wants to read more might place books where they are easily accessible. Someone who wants to exercise might create a routine that fits naturally into their daily schedule. Small adjustments to the environment can reinforce positive behavior. There is also a psychological benefit to strong habits. When beneficial actions become automatic, the mind spends less energy deciding what to do. Instead of constantly debating whether to work, learn, or practice, those behaviors simply become part of the routine. Progress becomes natural rather than forced. This is why habits separate individuals from the crowd so effectively. While many people rely on bursts of motivation, disciplined habits continue even when motivation fades. They create steady momentum that carries progress forward day after day. Over time, these habits produce something remarkable. Skills improve, confidence strengthens, opportunities expand, and gradually, the person who once looked ordinary begins standing apart. Not because of sudden luck or dramatic talent, but because their daily actions moved in a different direction. The crowd often focuses on visible success while ignoring the invisible routines that created it. But those who understand the power of habits recognize that greatness is rarely a single event. It is the result of thousands of small actions repeated with purpose. And when your habits move in a different direction from the crowd, your life eventually does the same. Chapter 10. Learn to use criticism as a weapon. The moment you begin doing something different from the crowd, criticism will appear. It is almost inevitable. As long as you follow the same path as everyone else, you remain invisible. Your choices blend comfortably into the background, but the moment you step outside the pattern, people begin to notice. And with that attention often comes judgment. Criticism can take many forms. Sometimes it appears as direct disagreement. Someone openly questions your decisions or challenges your ideas. Other times it arrives in quieter ways, subtle doubts, sarcastic remarks, or dismissive comments that suggest your efforts are unrealistic. And occasionally it comes disguised as advice, where people warn you about risks you already understand. For many individuals, criticism becomes a powerful obstacle. The discomfort of being judged can make people retreat back into the safety of the crowd. They silence their ideas, postpone their ambitions, and convince themselves that the safer path might be the wiser one. But those who truly dare to be different eventually learn an important lesson. Criticism is not always an enemy. In many cases, it can become a powerful tool. Consider how criticism functions in everyday life. When someone challenges your work or questions your thinking, two possibilities exist. The criticism may contain useful insight, or it may simply reflect someone else's perspective or fear. The skill lies in learning how to distinguish between the two. Constructive criticism is valuable because it highlights areas for improvement. Even the most talented individuals benefit from thoughtful feedback. Writers refine their work through editors. Athletes improve through coaches who analyze their performance. Inventors strengthen their designs through testing and evaluation. In these situations, criticism acts like a sharpening stone. It refines ability rather than weakening it. However, not all criticism carries wisdom. Some criticism comes from individuals who feel uncomfortable with change. When someone pursues an unfamiliar path, it can challenge the expectations of those around them. Instead of examining the possibility of growth, critics sometimes respond by discouraging the effort. Imagine a young entrepreneur named Nadia who decides to start a small online business. At first, her idea seems uncertain. Friends question whether it will succeed. Some relatives advise her to abandon the project and pursue something more traditional. Their words are not necessarily malicious. Many simply believe they are protecting her from failure. But Nadia approaches criticism differently. Instead of reacting emotionally, she examines each comment carefully. When someone offers useful advice about improving her product or marketing strategy, she listens and learns. When someone dismisses the idea entirely without understanding it, she acknowledges the opinion but does not allow it to control her decisions. Over time, her business begins to grow. The same voices that once questioned her choice now observe the results with curiosity. This example illustrates a crucial principle. Criticism often reveals more about the perspective of the critic than about the ability of the person being criticized. People evaluate ideas based on their own experiences, fears, and beliefs. When they encounter something unfamiliar, skepticism can be a natural reaction. Understanding this allows you to approach criticism with calmness rather than defensiveness. There is another powerful way to use criticism as a weapon for growth. Instead of allowing negative opinions to weaken your determination, you can allow them to strengthen your focus. When someone doubts your ability, it creates an opportunity to prove to yourself more than anyone else that your commitment is stronger than their skepticism. Many accomplished individuals have described how criticism fueled their motivation. Being underestimated forced them to work harder, think more creatively, and refine their skills. What once felt discouraging eventually became a source of energy. However, this approach requires emotional discipline. The mind naturally reacts to criticism with frustration or self-doubt. Learning to pause, reflect, and respond thoughtfully takes practice. It means refusing to let momentary emotions determine long-term decisions. One helpful perspective is to view criticism as information rather than judgment. Information can be evaluated, filtered, and used. When criticism contains truth, it becomes guidance for improvement. When it lacks substance, it can simply be set aside. The ability to handle criticism calmly also builds resilience. Life will rarely unfold without obstacles or disagreement. Individuals who remain steady in the face of criticism develop a mental strength that becomes increasingly valuable over time. Eventually, something interesting happens. The more comfortable you become with criticism, the less power it holds over you. Instead of fearing it, you begin expecting it as a natural part of growth. When new ideas appear, discussion and disagreement often follow. This process, though sometimes uncomfortable, is also part of progress. The crowd often avoids criticism by avoiding risk. When people repeat familiar actions, they rarely face strong opposition, but they also rarely achieve extraordinary results. Those who dare to be different understand that criticism is part of the journey. Instead of treating it as a signal to retreat, they treat it as feedback, motivation, or simply background noise. In time, criticism stops being a barrier and becomes something else entirely, a sharpening force that strengthens resolve, refines ability, and reminds you that moving beyond the crowd will always attract attention, and when used wisely, that attention can become one of your greatest advantages. Chapter 11. Choose an environment that elevates you. Few forces influence a person's life more quietly and more powerfully than the environment they live in. The people you spend time with, the conversations you hear every day, the expectations surrounding you, and even the attitudes that dominate your social circle slowly shape the way you think. Often this influence happens so gradually that it goes unnoticed. Imagine placing a small seed in two different environments. One environment offers sunlight, fertile soil, and steady water. The other provides poor soil, little light, and constant neglect. The seed itself is the same in both situations, yet the outcome will be dramatically different. In one place it grows strong and healthy, in the other it struggles to survive. Human potential works in a similar way. Talent and ambition matter, but the environment surrounding a person often determines whether those qualities grow or slowly fade away. Look at how environments affect everyday behavior. When someone spends time with people who constantly complain about problems but never search for solutions, that mindset gradually becomes normal. Conversations revolve around limitations, obstacles, and frustrations. Over time, ambition begins to shrink because the surrounding culture discourages bold thinking. On the other hand, when someone spends time with individuals who discuss ideas, opportunities, and improvement, something different begins to happen. Conversations stimulate curiosity, new possibilities are explored, growth becomes part of the shared atmosphere. This is why environment plays such an important role in daring to be different. If you are surrounded by people who fear change and resist ambition, pursuing a unique path becomes far more difficult. Every step forward may be met with doubt or skepticism. Consider the story of a young programmer named Hassan. In his early years, he lived in a community where few people understood technology or innovation. Most conversations revolved around routine jobs and familiar lifestyles. Hassan enjoyed learning about software and digital systems, but he rarely found anyone who shared his interest. For a long time, he struggled to maintain motivation. Without encouragement or stimulating conversation, his enthusiasm occasionally faded. But everything began to change when he joined an online community of developers from different parts of the world. Suddenly, he was surrounded by people discussing creative ideas, solving complex problems, and sharing new knowledge. The difference was remarkable. Hassan's curiosity grew stronger. He began working on projects he had never imagined before. The environment had shifted, and with it, his sense of possibility expanded. This example highlights an important truth. You do not always need to change who you are in order to grow. You often need to change what surrounds you. Of course, this does not mean abandoning relationships or isolating yourself from people who think differently. Diversity of perspective can be valuable, but it does mean being intentional about where you invest your time and energy. Ask yourself a simple question: do the environments I spend time in encourage growth or discourage it? Some environments push people toward improvement. They encourage learning, creativity, and discipline. They celebrate progress rather than criticize it. In these spaces, ambition feels natural. Other environments quietly drain motivation. They reward conformity and discourage initiative. In these places, individuals who dare to be different may feel pressure to return to the familiar. Recognizing this difference is important because environment does not merely influence behavior, it shapes identity. When certain ideas are repeated daily, they begin to feel like truth. If you constantly hear that success is impossible, doubt becomes normal. But if you regularly hear stories of effort, resilience, and achievement, confidence begins to grow. There is also another powerful aspect of environment: standards. Every group develops an unspoken standard for what is considered normal behavior. In some groups, learning new skills is ordinary. In others, it may appear unusual. In some circles, discussing ambitious goals is common. In others, such conversations might feel uncomfortable. When you place yourself in an environment with higher standards, your own expectations begin to rise. Effort becomes normal. Discipline becomes routine. The people around you inspire you simply by the way they live. This does not mean the journey will always feel comfortable. Entering a new environment often requires humility and patience. At first, you may feel inexperienced compared to those around you, but this discomfort is often a sign that growth is taking place. Over time, the environment begins shaping your habits, your thinking, and even your sense of what is possible. Daring to be different is rarely a solo journey. While courage and independence are essential, the environments you choose can either accelerate or slow your progress. When you surround yourself with people who value growth, challenge assumptions, and pursue meaningful goals, your own path becomes clearer. And gradually, almost without noticing it, the environment that once influenced you begins to transform into something else entirely. It becomes a place where your ambitions are not questioned, they are strengthened. In the right environment, daring to be different no longer feels unusual. It simply feels natural. Chapter 12. Accept risk as the price of uniqueness. Every meaningful path in life carries a certain level of risk. The moment you decide to move beyond the familiar, uncertainty appears. Plans may not unfold exactly as expected. Results may take longer than hoped. Doubts may occasionally whisper in the back of your mind. Yet this uncertainty is not a sign that something is wrong. It is often a sign that you are moving beyond the boundaries of the ordinary. The crowd usually avoids risk whenever possible. Safety feels comfortable, predictable, and reassuring. When people follow the same routines and make the same choices as those around them, they reduce the chance of failure, but they also reduce the chance of extraordinary success. Think about how many decisions people make based on avoiding uncertainty. They choose careers that feel secure rather than fulfilling. They avoid opportunities that seem challenging. They delay ambitious goals because the outcome is not guaranteed. Over time, this pattern creates lives that are stable but limited. Risk, however, plays a different role in the lives of those who dare to be different. Instead of viewing risk as something to fear, they see it as a necessary companion to growth. They understand that every new possibility carries a degree of uncertainty. Consider the story of a young architect named Farhan. After several years working in a large firm, he began imagining a new approach to sustainable building design. His ideas focused on combining modern architecture with environmentally responsible materials and energy systems. The concept excited him, but it also required stepping away from the stability of his current position. Many people advised him to remain where he was. His job provided a steady income and a predictable future. Starting his own small design studio seemed uncertain. Clients might not appear immediately. Projects could take time to develop. The risk was real, but Farhan realized something important. If he stayed within the comfort of his current role, the ideas that inspired him would likely remain only ideas. They would never have the opportunity to grow into something meaningful. After careful planning, he decided to move forward. The first year was challenging. There were moments of doubt, financial pressure, and long hours of work. Yet gradually, his designs began attracting attention. Clients interested in sustainable architecture discovered his work. The very risk that once seemed intimidating became the doorway to opportunities he could never have experienced otherwise. This example reveals an essential principle. Risk is often the bridge between imagination and reality. Of course, accepting risk does not mean acting recklessly. Wisdom lies in understanding the difference between thoughtful risk and careless decisions. Thoughtful risk involves preparation, research, and strategic planning. It means evaluating possibilities while still recognizing that uncertainty will always remain. Many of the greatest achievements in history were built on thoughtful risk. Explorers ventured into unknown territories. Scientists tested ideas that challenged established beliefs. Entrepreneurs invested time and energy into concepts that others initially doubted. In each case, success was not guaranteed. But without the willingness to accept uncertainty, progress would have been impossible. Another important truth about risk is that it gradually becomes easier to manage with experience. The first time you step outside your comfort zone may feel intimidating. But each time you face uncertainty and move forward anyway, confidence grows. The unknown begins to feel less threatening because you develop the skills to navigate it. Think of risk as a training ground for courage. Every challenge teaches something new. Every attempt strengthens resilience. Even when outcomes do not unfold as expected, valuable lessons appear. These lessons become the foundation for future success. The crowd often views failure as something to avoid at all costs. But those who pursue unique paths understand that temporary setbacks are part of the process. Mistakes reveal weaknesses that can be improved. Unexpected results inspire new strategies. In this way, risk becomes a teacher. There is also another side to risk that many people overlook. While stepping into uncertainty may feel uncomfortable, remaining in a stagnant situation carries its own kind of risk. A life spent avoiding change can slowly lead to missed opportunities, unrealized potential, and quiet regret. Years later, many people look back and wonder what might have happened if they had tried, if they had taken the chance, if they had trusted their ideas enough to explore them. Accepting risk does not guarantee immediate success, but it guarantees something equally valuable: movement. It allows your life to evolve rather than remain frozen in familiar patterns. When you dare to be different, you naturally step into spaces where certainty is limited. The path may not always be clear, and results may not always appear quickly, but within that uncertainty lies possibility. Each decision to move forward despite doubt strengthens your ability to navigate the unknown. Each challenge expands your understanding of what you are capable of achieving, and gradually, something remarkable happens. What once felt like risk begins to feel like opportunity. Because those who rise above the crowd are rarely the ones who avoided uncertainty. They are the ones who accepted it as the price of creating something extraordinary. Chapter 13. Define success on your own terms. One of the most powerful traps in life is chasing a definition of success that was never truly your own. Society quietly offers a standard formula for what success is supposed to look like. A certain career, a certain level of income, a certain lifestyle, a certain image that signals achievement to others. From an early age, people begin absorbing these ideas. They hear conversations about prestigious jobs, impressive titles, and visible signs of wealth. Gradually, these signals become the measuring stick for progress. Without even noticing it, many individuals start building their lives around expectations they never consciously chose. The problem is not that these goals are wrong. Wealth, recognition, and professional achievement can all be meaningful accomplishments, The real problem appears when someone pursues them without asking a deeper question. Do these goals actually align with the life I want to live? Imagine climbing a tall mountain for many years. The journey is demanding, and reaching the top requires discipline and effort. But when you finally arrive, you realize something surprising. The view does not bring satisfaction. The mountain you climbed was impressive, but it was not the mountain you truly cared about. This experience happens more often than people realize. Individuals work tirelessly to achieve goals that impress others, only to discover that the reward feels strangely empty. Defining success on your own terms requires stepping away from the noise of social expectations and examining your own values. What kind of life brings you genuine fulfillment? What kind of work feels meaningful? What kind of impact would you like to create? These questions may sound simple, but answering them honestly requires reflection. The mind is often influenced by years of conditioning. It takes time to separate your authentic desires from the expectations that have surrounded you. Consider the example of a woman named Layla, who pursued a prestigious career in corporate finance. From the outside, her life appeared successful. She held a respected position, earned a high income, and received recognition from colleagues and clients. Yet inside, something felt incomplete. Layla had always enjoyed working with community organizations and educational initiatives. During her free time, she volunteered with programs that supported young students in developing skills and confidence. Those experiences brought a sense of purpose that her corporate work never fully provided. Eventually, she began asking herself an important question: what if success for me means something different? After careful consideration, Layla decided to shift her focus toward educational development projects. The transition required planning and patience. At times she questioned whether leaving a prestigious position was wise, but as she moved closer to work that aligned with her values, her sense of fulfillment grew stronger. Her story illustrates an important truth. Success is deeply personal. What brings satisfaction to one person may feel empty to another. The crowd often measures success through visible achievements, status, income, titles, and recognition. These indicators are easy to observe and compare, but the deeper elements of success, purpose, growth, contribution, and inner fulfillment are far more meaningful. Defining your own version of success allows you to align your efforts with what truly matters. Instead of chasing approval or comparison, your goals become connected to your values. This alignment creates clarity. Decisions become easier because they are guided by purpose rather than pressure. When obstacles appear, motivation remains strong because the path you are following reflects your own priorities. Another important benefit of defining success personally is freedom from unnecessary comparison. When success is defined only by external standards, people constantly measure themselves against others. Someone always appears more accomplished, more successful, or more advanced. But when your goals reflect your own vision, comparison loses its power. Your progress becomes a personal journey rather than a competition. This does not mean ignoring ambition or avoiding high achievement. In fact, defining success on your own terms often strengthens ambition because your goals carry deeper meaning. Effort becomes more rewarding when it moves you towards something you truly value. There is also a powerful sense of responsibility that comes with this approach. Once you define success for yourself, the responsibility for pursuing it belongs entirely to you. The crowd can no longer dictate your direction. Your path becomes a reflection of your choices. This independence is one of the defining characteristics of individuals who dare to be different. They refuse to measure their lives solely by the expectations of others. Instead, they examine their own values and build goals that reflect those values. The process may take time. Your definition of success may evolve as you grow and gain new experiences. That is perfectly natural. Life is not a static journey, and neither are your aspirations. What matters most is maintaining awareness, periodically stepping back to ask whether the path you are walking still reflects the life you want to build. Because in the end, success is not simply about reaching impressive destinations. It is about creating a life that feels meaningful when you wake up each morning. And that kind of success can never be defined by the crowd. It must be defined by you. Chapter 14. Stay different, even when success arrives. One of the most interesting moments in any journey occurs after success begins to appear. The struggle that once defined the path slowly changes. opportunities become more visible, recognition begins to grow, the ideas that once seemed unusual start receiving approval, and with this new stage comes a challenge that many people do not expect. The challenge is not failure, the challenge is staying true to the mindset that created success in the first place. When individuals begin their journey, they often rely on courage, curiosity, and determination. They question assumptions, experiment with new approaches, and remain open to learning. Their independence allows them to move beyond the limitations of the crowd. But once success arrives, something subtle can begin to change. Comfort returns, expectations grow. The same person who once challenged the rules may start protecting their position instead of exploring new possibilities. This shift happens more often than people realize. The fear of losing success can quietly replace the desire to grow. Instead of asking bold questions, individuals may start repeating the strategies that once worked. Over time, the originality that created progress begins to fade. Remaining different requires awareness during this stage. Consider the story of a chef named Raphael, who built a reputation for creating innovative dishes. In the early years of his career, he experimented constantly. He combined unusual ingredients, explored unfamiliar techniques, and challenged traditional culinary expectations. At first, his work attracted curiosity rather than widespread praise. Some people questioned his creativity, but gradually his restaurant gained recognition. Guests admired the originality of his cooking, and his reputation began to grow. Success brought attention, and attention brought pressure. Customers started expecting the same famous dishes each time they visited. Raphael faced a decision. He could simply repeat what had already become popular, protecting his reputation by avoiding risk, or he could continue experimenting, even if it meant surprising people who expected familiarity. He chose the second path. Even after success arrived, Raphael continued exploring new ideas in his kitchen. Some experiments worked brilliantly, others required adjustment. But by maintaining the spirit of curiosity that defined his early work, he preserved the creative energy that made his restaurant unique. This example reflects a deeper principle. Success is not a final destination, it is a stage in a continuing process of growth. The qualities that help someone rise above the crowd must be maintained even after recognition appears. One reason this becomes difficult is because success often attracts attention from the crowd. People who once doubted you may suddenly offer praise. Opportunities multiply, expectations increase, and gradually it becomes tempting to shape your behavior around maintaining approval rather than pursuing originality. But true progress rarely comes from protecting comfort. It comes from continuing to challenge yourself. Remaining different after success means continuing to learn. It means resisting the temptation to believe you have already mastered everything. The most accomplished individuals often maintain the mindset of students, constantly exploring new knowledge and perspectives. Another important aspect of this stage is humility. Success can sometimes create the illusion that past achievements guarantee future results, yet every field continues evolving. New ideas appear, new challenges emerge. Remaining humble keeps the mind open to growth rather than locked into past success. There is also a deeper emotional dimension to this process. When someone achieves recognition, they may feel pressure to maintain a certain image. The crowd may begin projecting expectations about how that person should behave or what they should create next. If you allow those expectations to control your decisions, the originality that once defined you may gradually disappear. Instead of following your vision, you begin managing the reactions of others. Remaining authentic requires the courage to ignore those pressures. The same independence that allowed you to break away from the crowd in the beginning must remain present even after success appears. Your vision must remain stronger than the desire for constant approval. This does not mean rejecting success or refusing appreciation. Recognition can be rewarding, and it often reflects genuine effort and creativity. But recognition should never become the reason you stop growing. Progress belongs to those who remain curious even after they have achieved something meaningful. It belongs to those who continue experimenting when others expect repetition. It belongs to those who remember that success is not something to protect, it is something to build upon. Daring to be different is not a temporary phase, it is a mindset that continues throughout life. The courage to think independently, explore new ideas, and challenge familiar patterns must remain active long after success begins to appear, because the moment you stop daring to be different is the moment your journey quietly begins to resemble the crowd once again, and those who truly rise above the crowd understand one thing clearly: success is not the end of the path, it is simply the beginning of a higher one. Chapter 15. Become the example that changes others. A life lived differently does more than change the direction of one person's journey. It quietly influences the people who witness it. When someone dares to break the pattern, others begin to notice. They may not always say it out loud, but the example plants a powerful question in their minds. If this person can do it, perhaps I can too. Human beings learn not only through instruction, but through observation. We watch how others behave. We notice the decisions they make. We observe the courage they display when facing uncertainty. These examples often influence us far more deeply than words alone. Think about the teachers, mentors, or leaders who left a lasting impression on your life. Their influence likely came not just from what they said, but from how they lived. Their actions demonstrated possibilities that once seemed distant or unrealistic. This is one of the hidden powers of daring to be different. When you choose to live intentionally rather than automatically following the crowd, your life becomes a quiet form of leadership. Leadership does not always require authority or public recognition. Sometimes leadership appears simply through example. A person who pursues growth despite doubt shows others that courage is possible. Someone who challenges limiting beliefs demonstrates that change is achievable. Imagine a young man named Tariq, who grew up in a community where most people believed success required leaving their hometown permanently. Opportunities seemed limited, and many individuals accepted that situation as an unchangeable reality. Tariq saw things differently. Instead of leaving, he began studying ways to build local businesses that could create jobs within the community. At first, many people questioned his approach. The idea seemed unusual because no one around him had attempted it before, but Tariq continued working patiently. He learned about entrepreneurship, developed partnerships, and slowly launched small projects that began creating opportunities for others. As his work expanded, people who once doubted him started asking questions. They wanted to understand how he had turned a different idea into a real outcome. Soon, other young people in the community began exploring their own projects. Some started small companies, others developed educational programs or creative initiatives. Tariq had not forced anyone to follow his path, he had simply demonstrated that a different path existed. This is how influence often spreads. One example inspires another. One courageous decision encourages someone else to reconsider their own limitations. There is a ripple effect in human behavior. When people see someone acting with conviction, it expands their sense of possibility. The boundaries that once felt permanent begin to look flexible. This does not mean every person who observes your journey will immediately follow the same direction. Some individuals may remain skeptical, others may continue choosing familiar routines. That is perfectly natural. Everyone moves at their own pace. What matters is that your actions create a visible alternative to the pattern. Consider how social change has often occurred throughout history. Many movements began with a small number of individuals who refused to accept existing limitations. Their courage inspired others, and gradually a larger group formed around the same vision. The same principle applies to everyday life. Your willingness to pursue meaningful goals can influence friends, colleagues, and even strangers. Your discipline can inspire someone who once doubted their own potential. Your independence can encourage others to think more freely. This influence does not require perfection. In fact, showing your struggles and challenges can make your example even more powerful. When people see that growth involves effort and persistence, they understand that success is not reserved for a select few. Authenticity strengthens influence far more than flawless appearance. Another important aspect of becoming an example is humility. The purpose of living differently is not to impress others or to prove superiority. The purpose is to pursue a life aligned with your values and potential. When others benefit from observing that journey, it becomes a natural extension of your effort. Over time, the influence of example can travel further than you might expect. A conversation you have today may encourage someone to pursue an idea years later. A project you begin may inspire others to create new possibilities in their own communities. You may never fully see the impact of your actions, but that does not reduce their significance. Daring to be different is not just a personal decision, it is also a contribution to the world around you. Each time someone chooses courage over conformity, creativity over imitation, and growth over comfort, the boundaries of what others believe possible begin to expand, and perhaps that is the greatest outcome of all. Because when one person breaks the pattern, they do more than change their own life. They open the door for many others to do the same. Conclusion: every generation faces the same quiet choice. Follow the pattern that already exists, or step outside it and create something new. The path of the crowd is always visible. It is clearly marked, widely accepted, and reinforced by tradition. It promises safety, familiarity, and the comfort of belonging, but it also carries an invisible cost, the slow surrender of individuality. Daring to be different does not mean rejecting society or constantly opposing others. It means something deeper. It means living with awareness. It means questioning patterns that limit growth, thinking independently when conformity feels easier, and choosing courage even when certainty is not guaranteed. Throughout this audiobook, you have explored a simple but powerful idea. Most people live according to patterns they never consciously chose. Expectations, habits, and social pressure quietly shape their decisions. Without realizing it, they begin repeating the same routines, thinking the same thoughts, and pursuing the same goals as those around them. But the moment you recognize those patterns, something changes. Awareness creates freedom. Once you see the path that the crowd is following, you gain the ability to choose whether it truly belongs to you. Breaking away from the pattern is rarely comfortable at first. It requires independent thinking when others prefer agreement. It requires courage when doubt appears. It requires discipline when progress feels slow, and at times it requires standing alone until others begin to understand your vision. Yet this is exactly where growth begins. Every meaningful change in history started with individuals who dared to step beyond the expectations surrounding them. They questioned assumptions, they explored ideas others ignored, they remained committed to their purpose even when recognition was distant. The same principle applies to your own life. Your differences are not obstacles to success. They are the foundation of your potential, your ideas, your experiences, your perspective on the world. These qualities form a combination that no one else possesses in exactly the same way. When you develop those qualities intentionally, they become your strength. Along the way, you will encounter criticism, uncertainty, and moments of doubt. These experiences are not signs that you are moving in the wrong direction. In many cases, they are evidence that you are moving beyond the familiar boundaries of the crowd. Growth rarely occurs inside comfort. But remember this as well: daring to be different is not about rebellion. It is not about rejecting every tradition or seeking attention by opposing others. The purpose is far more meaningful. It is about living authentically, building a life guided by purpose, curiosity, and thoughtful independence. When you do this, something remarkable begins to happen. You stop measuring your life by the approval of others. You begin defining success according to your own values. Your habits align with growth instead of distraction. Your environment supports ambition rather than limiting it. And gradually, step by step, the path you walk begins to look different from the path of the crowd. Over time, your example will influence others. People who once believed they had to follow the same pattern may begin questioning their own assumptions. They may notice your courage and realize that a different way of living is possible. You may never fully see how far that influence reaches. But every life lived with authenticity expands the boundaries of possibility for someone else. So the question that remains is simple. Will you follow the pattern that already exists, or will you create your own? The choice belongs to you, because the world does not move forward when everyone follows the crowd. It moves forward when someone dares to step beyond it.